Welcome back to Dev Dive episode 18. As always, I'm your host, Nighthawk. I'm joined by my co-host, Riot Legend Larry, and we have two guests on today for the show about user experience in games. Welcome, Vivi and Chris. I hope you can tell which is which.
Do we get to choose now, or?
Yeah. No, you have to call it out.
We have to answer each other's questions.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. It's gonna be a fight to the death, I'm sure.
So let's start off with introducing both of y'all. Vivi, can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. I am currently a UX designer for Phoenix Labs. But I actually started my UX journey as a coordinator at Riot Games. From there, I started to basically support any UX needs in I would say teams that didn't have a lot of UX support. And so from there, I started pretty much like learning on the job, like how to do this, gain a portfolio, interviewed, got hired as a full-time UX designer there. And then from there, I worked most closely with creative development programs. So like narrative projects. I would say that yeah, in the span of like 5, 6 years at Riot, and then now I work more in the game space with Dauntless as my main game project.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Larry is also Vivi's husband. So welcome to the show finally. We've been meaning to have you on for a long time, but
I'll say all those times that I talk about Vivi. That's Vivi.
That's Vivi. So how about you, Chris? What's your story?
Much longer one than that. Let's see. I got started a long time ago. I'll try to make this as short as possible, honestly. I got started a long time ago. I was actually working as a graphic designer and not at the same time as a coder. And because I could speak both those languages, I was pulled into this field with what was then called information architecture. And it started to grow and finding all the stuff that was sliding through the gaps. And I get to work on a lot of fun, innovative things, physical products. And I got to work with Lucent Technologies on this voice-based phone browser, the first one, which is since now like the basis of Siri, Cortana, Alexa, all that stuff. After a while there, I moved over to the West Coast where I got to work on some fun stuff. Let's see. I worked on designing medical devices for a while. That was really fun and surprisingly video game inspired. From there, I moved down to San Francisco, where I worked with a company called IDEO, which is one of those companies that people in the field know, but outside the field, no one's heard of. But they design a lot of the stuff behind the stuff that people know. Like they designed the first Macintosh, the Swiffer Sweeper, brain surgery tools, all this stuff that other companies get a lot of progress from. From that, I started venturing off on my own and freelancing around the world doing fun stuff like designing experiences in Tokyo for a big adventure that happened to working with NASA, working with Google. One of the cool things in there that makes me sound way cooler than I actually am is that I got to work with Stephen Hawking and designing his wheelchair, the interface that he used to talk. Then I started up with an agency. I got to design a lot of augmented reality things. I'm skipping over so much stuff that's actually video game related. I've been on the front page of the App Store like 10 times for various things, getting to work with like Sesame Street. I designed an AR dollhouse for Mattel. I designed a basketball for Wilson, a smart basketball that tracks everything you do and tracks and helps coach you to become a better player. From there, I worked at Riot for a few years, where I met Vivi and Larry. And I got to work on various games that I still know all the code names for, and as well as mostly within Riot itself and designing the company. I've gotten to do a lot of other freelance things since then as well, which is nice.
Yeah, you really have had a very storied career. Your LinkedIn must be awesome.
They have a limit on it. I can't just cram it all in there. It's crazy.
I haven't reached that limit. I didn't know there was one. I have a pretty short career myself.
Yeah, it's actually fun. I get to work in a lot of fields, but I think of myself as doing one thing really well. I just know how to apply it to anything.
I like that. I like people who can do a lot of different things. I think it's pretty useful. I'm not in the game industry myself, but I think it's pretty useful to be in games and to be able to wear a lot of different hats, because that does seem to be a requirement at some of these studios.
Yeah, especially the smaller ones.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this is going to be sort of a layperson's perspective at UX question, because I think a lot of people who might be listening to this podcast might not know a lot about it. We sort of live in a bubble where, I mean, Larry is married to Vivi, so he obviously gets a lot of UX experience from that secondhand. And you're in UX, so you know that. But from me and Larry's perspective, we don't even know exactly like what a good definition of UX would be. So let's start off with what would be your definition of UX, like if you had to explain it to your parents or somebody who had no idea what this is about.
This is actually one of my favorite questions that I like. I ask other people in the field this because no one gives the same answer. And I always hear hilarious things like, I'm a professional napkin sketcher, or I'm a hunter and gatherer of research, and stuff like that. It's always funny. I mean, it really, for me, just comes down to the experience someone has whenever they're doing something, be it a product or a service or an event or anything like that. How do you make it so that you're defining their experience really well? If that is an interface or if it's an interaction with someone or whatever, it can be a very broad thing.
So how about you, Vivi? How would you explain it?
This is really funny because like 2 years ago I was trying to explain this to Larry's mom with a huge language barrier. And it came down to we were looking at their is it neighbor the
Mhm.
yeah and there was a really interesting um interaction that was happening in their GPS system where it would start um ringing when you were going over the speed limit in the area. And I found that really interesting because, not everyone is looking at a phone. And trying to have this, while you're driving, right? To know that you're over the speed limit, but the sound was enough to be like, oh, I'm actually over. And so I was trying to explain to her that understanding that that's a problem, that going over the speed limit, right? And safety. And then coming up with a solution is essentially user experience. And that it's not necessarily the interface, but it's the interface, how the interface communicates with the system underneath, how I interact as a user with that interface, the fact that there's audio, the fact that it's on a phone, the fact that there's internet connections that's going to disrupt that message, et cetera, et cetera. That's basically like literally your entire experience while you're trying to interact with something, and it's not just the UI.
Yeah.
That's UX. And it was really interesting to have that conversation, and that's kind of become my example to explain what I do. Also with my family, because there is a language there, a barrier there between English and Spanish, um, and how I speak better about UX in English than in Spanish, and so therefore I tried to use that as an example. More a little bit differently, because I think that my definition changes also based on the um, environment that I'm supporting, because a GPS is very functional first. I find that games UX is a little bit different in the sense that you want to solve for functionality, but you also want to kind of find a balance between that and in a game experience that you want people to have and walk away with. And difficulty might be difficulty might be a little bit okay if that matches the intended experience that you want players to have at the end of the day. But you want people to walk away with having an intended experience. And if the systems that you put into place support that thesis, then overall that's a good experience.
Yeah. And I think that's something
it's
coming from a layperson's perspective, like you were sort of hinting at. The biggest misconception about UX and UX design is that a lot of people come into it thinking like, oh, it's just they make UIs and they make like they make the website, the top bar, the navigation bar, and stuff like that. So I think it's really great to explain to people who maybe have that misconception that it's not just about that. It's about the second you enter a site, the second you enter a game, the second you enter any experience, the UX designer is at work. They're cultivating that experience that you're having throughout the entire thing. And I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later in this talk, but I'm sure you guys work closely with game designers, with blanking on the tip of my tongue, but a lot of different other areas of the company to make sure that this UX experience actually happens properly. Yeah. So
yeah. To
sorry,
her point,
go
I
ahead,
think
Chris.
it's really important that like whenever one of the things that I've heard a lot is whenever something is put out in the world, it has been designed. Whether or not it's been intentionally designed or not is a different thing. And what experience designers really step in and start doing is where inside a lot of corporations in the world, whenever a product gets made, they kind of chug along until someone decides, oh, I want a promotion. So they just kind of like grab a thing and they shove it through the process to get out there and drop it on the world. And that's when it finds out. And what we do is run it through all those tests and start trying all the different variations so that whenever we start narrowing down, we know that when we get something out there, it's something that people actually want. It satisfies the needs and people will actually, it'll be successful.
So that was actually a pretty good answer to the question I was about to ask, but I'll ask it anyway because I want to hear if the answer changes at all. Why is good user experience design so important? Like, why does this need to be a thing at pretty much every company who's making something?
I mean, I think that if you have first impressions of products is very important, and if you don't have a good impression on the product, what's making you I guess what's enticing you to come back and try over and over the same product. And I think in games it's a little bit different because I think that core like very strong core gameplay loops can bypass like I guess bad UX. Um, you can argue that some of the earlier like I mean not to like try and figure out how to have a careful conversation here without like saying this is bad UX or anything like that because we've as an industry have gotten better on UX over time. But there has been like, let's say like 10, 20 year ago games that still are that haven't really changed that still people play to get today. And I would argue that the game is as a concept and as a core the opportunity or the proposition of that game is so strong that the UX is I don't want to say negligible, but it's just people tend to tolerate it better than something like today's world where games are coming in and out every day. There's something new, and first impression is very high. Like it needs to meet a specific quality bar, or else people are moving on to the next, I guess, content offering. And so, if you want to be a successful company, that you want to have successful products that are actually solving player problems or people problems, and you want to be doing it in a way that you're ensuring that people are going to continuously come back to your product over time, or continue, or that you're solving, the right problems, as opposed to just get quickly there, not validate assumptions and unfortunately not deliver the right player experiences.
Yeah.
So from a business perspective, it's extremely important because that's what keeps companies afloat. And then from a player perspective, bad experiences cause bad pain and increase player churn, which then means that people leave. And
I'll take a pause for just 1 second. I have to restart my Discord because I have an audio issue. I didn't want to cut you off in the middle of your thing. So 2 seconds, guys. Bum-ba-da-da.
Great, Ben's back, so I guess we can't shit talk because
No more fun. Sorry, guys. Let me turn on my camera. There we
I'm
go.
looking at the chat.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with mine either. I guess this is always how it is, though.
So hopefully that didn't break up the flow too much, but yeah, Vivi had a really great answer to that, and I'd like to hear if Chris had anything to bounce off of it or sort of go his own way with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think she covered a lot of great ground there. It's really true. I think what you started to get into that gets really interesting to me is how it's different from how designing for games is different from designing for everything else. Because there's a lot of catchphrases that people think of, like, ease of use. Is it only so many clicks to get in there? And a lot of that stuff is almost irrelevant when it comes to games, because you don't want a game to be super easy to play and just like click and you're done, you win. You want it to provide resistance at the certain times, and that's the experience. Are you providing the right kind of resistance at the right times? Are you providing clues at the right points where people will be able to figure things out on there? Are you, but not too much, those right levels on there, so that you're really getting inside their head and really figuring that out the entire time, and not just for one person, which is the key of it too, is that a wide variety of people will be playing these games. So how do you make it so that someone who's new to the genre is going to be able to figure it out really quickly? How do you make it so that someone who's a pro steps in and isn't bored by the game? How do you make it so that it scales really well to cater to all kinds of different people? It's really important.
Yeah. And I think just to step in with the layperson's perspective again, something that me and Larry joke about a lot, and I think we've talked about it with Vivi a little bit too, is most people don't really notice good user experience just because it's so seamless. But a lot of people can notice, even if they can't put their finger on it, they notice bad user experience. They notice bad UX. Because if you ever started to a game or went to a website and you're just like, oh God, this is just such a pain to do even the simplest thing, like opening my inventory and doing this or trying to get to the shopping basket. Why is it so hard? That's part of the reason why user experience is so important, because those experiences, you may not be able to tell like exactly what's going on, but more than likely somebody messed up during the UX process because of this.
It's really true. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like the goalie problem from soccer, which is that like if the team does great and the team wins, then the goalie gets no credit. But if something goes wrong, the goalie takes all the blame.
Yeah,
such a really good analogy.
That reminds me of like the balance team at Riot Games, where they just get so much garbage for all the people blaming them for bad balance, when in reality the game's pretty well balanced most of the time. There are outliers, of course, but
of course,
ups and downs, of course, and that's almost by design in a game like that. So we talked about this a little bit in our brief introductions, but I wanted to take a step back and talk about how you both got your start in the field in a little more in depth. So we'll start with you, Vivi. When did your interest in UX actually start? And like, what does your career specifically for that look like so far?
Really interesting, because when Kingdom Hearts 2 came out,
going back a little ways.
I have to go back. I have to. I gotta mention Disney and Kingdom Hearts in some way, shape, or form. No, but when that game came out, and I was watching the intro cinematic for obviously the second game, it sparked. That's the moment that I can say in my life that I was like, I want to work in game development. Back then, I my my whole world was around, I want to make players feel what I'm feeling today right now in this instant by watching this. I translated that into arts and animation and 3D modeling, which is what where my path as in the academic world, started. Was I was a 3D modeler and an animator, and that's where I completed my bachelor's. It wasn't until I started hitting my master's that I was like, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with, well, not that it doesn't have anything to do with emotional design, but what do I want to do? How do I get back to conveying emotions and like having players feel a thing that I've made and stuff like that? And actually back then I didn't have a very good support system that knew UX and that could point me in that direction. But I did have a very strong professor that like basically was like, I think what you're looking at is more in a psychology and like UX research. And so that started to pique an interest in that area, which then led me to player experience at Riot. and the idea that Riot, as a company, was focusing on player experience first. I didn't really know what that meant like 7, 8 years ago, but I liked what that sounded like, and it sounded like a step in the direction of what truly my goal was to be as a professional in the industry. And then once I actually entered, or had the opportunity to work at Riot, I was able to absorb about, things like UX design, user research, data analytics, like literally all these different like disciplines, at least within the realm of what back then was player experience as a company org structure thing. That's where I met Chris. And so like through that, I was able to understand things like, oh, um, this is what it means. This is bigger than UI. I was very hesitant at first too. Like I was like, I don't want to just do UI work. And I think that comes from this sense of like wonder and wanting to create like an experience and essentially get an emotion out of you, for what I create. And I think that also comes back from past experiences at Disney World. I mean, like Disney's a very important, I guess, event in my life. Being able to go to the theme parks, learn about the Disney Imagineering like principles, and like just like absorb like how they design at a theme park level and how they convey emotions as you're walking through different points um, of this like physical landscape. And so and I look at that and I say, how can I do that in a digital world? How can I then make moments for people to interact and have an experience, an emotion, whatever that may be? So that's kind of the work that excites me. It can lead later into more game design work. It can lead more into UI work. It really depends on what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to convey, or what the outcome I want players to have. And so, um, when I look at that, it's something like that. I would say that really like the combination of like video games and Disney Imagineering are like the core of why I do what I want to do. And they're like basically like my two little passion like things that collide, and I always try to find areas of opportunity where they can collide again, and then I can tinker and like try to figure out like how I can design delightful experiences for players.
Yeah, and I love how you touched on the Disney example, because I actually have that written down in the doc later. I wanted to talk about
Yep.
like how Disney. Well, I don't want to get too much into it right now, but I do want to talk about like how Disney and theme parks in general do design experiences like that, because I do think that has a big bearing on this discussion. But
For
before
sure.
we get into that, Chris, how about you? When did you start being interested in UX, and what does your career in that specifically look like so far?
Man, it's a really difficult question for me, honestly, because it was a very gradual thing for me. Like I said, like started off doing graphic design, doing coding, picking up things here and there, and like it slowly came to be while I was there. I'm lucky enough to be one of the early people who was doing that. Yeah, I remember designing and coding CD-ROMs and like seeing CD magazines and stuff like that were really futuristic at the time, but were just awesome. And as that went, I just kind of got more and more involved in that. Every time something came up, I would try to get on those projects and start doing things like that. And there's a bunch of little random things that I got to do along the way that got me closer and closer to it. I remember just from people like, "Oh, this is a cool project." Like, "Oh, how can I get on this?" To start doing things like that and making sure to like, "Hey, I'll help out. I got some spare time. I'll do stuff like that." And I even started getting involved in volunteering in organizations that are now like some of the biggest global organizations for the field. But at the time, they were a little mailing list that I was involved in that was really fun just because people cared about it so much, and there weren't many people that did that. Whereas now it's showing up in like top 5 professions on magazines and stuff like that, which is really cool to see.
Awesome. I think I realized I never asked this, or if you said, I must have been miles away. Where do you actually work right now?
I don't right now. Honestly, I've been doing freelance for a little while now since I left my last full-time gig. Um, been working on a lot of really fun, crazy projects, from big experiential things, people taking over hotels to give these immersive experiences, to helping out with a blockchain cryptocurrency based city that they're building in Nevada that is decentralized governance, and they're planning on having an esports arena and all kinds of fun stuff that's going to be fun. I find really fun, innovative new things and find a way to attach myself to them.
that sounds really fun. That I never even heard about. Is this like the cryptocurrency thing? City, is that a announced thing, or is that sort of just like it's being developed?
Both. It is announced. Yeah, I think the governor as well as the mayor of Reno both did big launch things for it. It's honestly a huge project. It was fun going out there and driving around, seeing like horses, like herds of horses. I don't know what you call a group of horse, like going
I think
around.
it's herds.
A herd.
Yeah.
Herd of horses.
And then
yeah,
a whinny of horses. Yeah. The and you get to see, because like the Tesla Gigafactory is there, one of the Google big server centers is there, and some other big factories, and they're all inside the city, and it's just growing, and it's really cool to see. It's amusingly not the first smart city that I've worked on over the years.
Wow, I had never even heard of that. I have to look into that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. I mean, who knows if it's gonna succeed or anything? It's either gonna change the world or be a huge flop. Either way, it sounds fun.
It sounds fun either way. So that pairs well. I think you just answered the question that I was about to ask. Was this like, in your experiences so far, in your career so far, what are like some of the standout moments that you've had where you're just like, wow, this is really cool. I get to work on this project, or I get to do this.
There's been a lot of fun ones. The amusing ones to me are the ones that I didn't think anyone else would care about. Like when I was at Intel is when I got to work with Stephen Hawking, and I got to work with Brian Greene. And I was briefly a theoretical astrophysics major in college. And so I was nerding out on this, and I loved it. And I love talking to these people, but I never brought it up after that because I never thought anyone cared. And I think the moment that it actually hit me was actually when I was at Riot in orientation with Larry. And and someone asked for like, oh, it's a crazy fact about you. And it's like, oh yeah, I remember that thing. And so I mentioned the Stephen Hawking thing, and everyone just kind of stopped and went like, you what? It's like, oh, I guess other people care about that too.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. I remember thinking, what's he doing here?
It's also been the way that Larry introduces Chris to any of our social circles.
I'm like, tell him the thing. That's one of the first things. I'm like, hi, this is my friend Chris. Chris, tell him the thing.
It's always so much nicer when you have somebody to brag for you, when you can bring them in. Comes off way better. How about you, Vivi? I know you worked on a lot of cool stuff at Riot over the years, and now you're starting to work out some pretty interesting stuff at Phoenix. So, do you have any standout moments so far?
Actually, so I worked a little bit on Store when it got redesigned into so it got visually redesigned from while it was in the Air client, and then it got ported into the current client of today. So I was involved from a shadowing and mentoring perspective there. And then from there I transitioned to player support, and I worked on some internal tool stuff there. I would say my favorite piece that I worked on was actually when I transitioned over to the like creative development organization and worked on the Runeterra map. That was a really cool and interesting project, just because we wanted players to e- essentially learn more about the world of Runeterra and establish it as like a living, breathing place in their brains, right? And so we were just trying to explore with how to do that in a very interactive way. We have a lot of, we used to have a lot of stories and like comics and like video and all that's basically tons of rich media. How do we position it in a way that maybe promotes learning about this world and also provides spatial context to where the events of this place is they're happening, so that the mental models are actually more properly, like, correct. Like what's happening in the world of Runeterra now feels a little bit more real because literally I saw that, in this comic, this happened here, but then now I see that in this story, this happened here. And like all these things and how they connect can actually even promote things like theories and stuff like that. And so it's it was a fun project and then it was reinforced after when it was received by players and then seeing it still be a tool used by some content creators when they talk about the lore of Runeterra. And so, and then I remember before I switched companies, internally at Riot, being able to see that as a tool for facilitating conversations about the world of Runeterra. So being able to see like conference rooms with like the map, and then them talking about like whatever lore project thing. And so that was that felt good.
Yeah.
Um,
And oh,
in
sorry.
sorry, and then in League, the preseason update with the Rise of the Elements and the Dragons, like that was a little bit of League work that I got out before I left, and so that was actually another fun project for sure. Um, I would say that the feature that I'm currently working on at Dauntless is a fun project. Unfortunately, I can't talk about it. But it is a project. It's a very meaty chunk. It is not necessarily often an experience where you just jump in to a new company and you're going to be shipping something in the like first few months. Um, and this one is, I could at least say that the name of the feature is called well, it used to be called Friendship Course. It's now called Slayer Links, and it's essentially a way to have people play with their friends.
That sounds really awesome. I wanted to
And
go
so
back a
it's a
little bit
very
to the
social experience, and that's like a whole new monster for me. How to engage, like make it so that it's fun for players to play with their friends.
do you have to refer to all like problems that you're solving as monsters because you work on Dauntless? Is that
Behemoths,
is that a requirement? Sorry, a
players
behemoth?
and behemoths. Yes.
You have to do it in a growly voice. Come on.
I wanted to bounce back to the Legends of Runeterra thing because, or sorry, not Legends of Runeterra. That's the game. The Runeterra map thing. Because yeah, you can really see how Riot used that as like a base to work on expanding the world because they've been focusing on that for the last year or so, really, really, really hard. And you can see using that as a base, they've started to come out with a bunch more comics. The show that's going to be coming out soon, expanding the world through Legends of Runeterra and all the cinematics we got through that. So yeah, it's really awesome to see that they spent a lot of time and resources reinvesting into the actual world of League of Legends and Valorant. Sorry, I almost called it Valorant, which I might go off on a mini rant on that because I really don't like that they
A
named
mini
a
rant
game.
on Valorant.
Yeah,
Valorant.
they named the
Is that
game
what you're-
that the one game in their series so far that has nothing to do with League of Legends. They named it after the continent that League of Legends is set on. So yeah, sorry, that just makes me a little upset. That's bad UX.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that for I think what's good is that it not only it fulfilled the needs of, I guess, rioters to better work on like, well, not better work, but like probably like understand like where all the chess pieces are happening in the world, like from a narrative perspective and how things like are moving, um, so that you can potentially position the story to go into multiple directions, right? And potentially like new things can come from that. At the same time, externally to players, it's essentially a reference tool for people to use. And as you're reading a story, you can say like, oh look, like they mentioned this location. I have no idea where this is, but when I go to the map and I see this location, and then I see that a champion has been in this other area, you can start creating like theories around whether or not these characters could meet, and that could be actually fun. And then from a developer's perspective, I would argue that if you see um, an interest in something like that, it could open up paths for you to explore those kinds of stories because we see that there is an interest in that direction. So why not, right? So being able to, um, I guess, facilitate like a way for it like people to be more interested in and discover things that they didn't know and and for the potential of more content coming out the door for them it's definitely a thing that we thought about too as we were making it. Actually, my favorite thing about that of that whole project was when we were working on like the wireframes, because when we were talking about like the theories and stuff like that, um I will always remember this because I have this still in my wireframes and totally not part of like anywhere else public. But when we were deconstructing Darius's like a Blood of Noxus comic, and we were trying to show that the story actually doesn't happen in Noxus. It happens also in Ionia. It also happens like in the water, like in between Noxus and Ionia, and then also like where these things are like kind of like happening, right? And to pitch this idea as like a way for us to facilitate like the discovery of new content. I may not particularly have been inspired to read the comic, but if I look at the map and I see that Darius was like, for the lack of a better term, baby making with like and we have like this spicy scene here. That could be like enough for me to be like, oh, what's this? And then dig deeper and then learn about the comic, and then that rabbit holes into like learning about the champion
Baby
or learning,
making. Yep.
yeah,
That's very
baby
important.
making
Yep.
theories
Gotta learn
about
about
Gotta
baby
that.
learn more about
making,
it.
and
Yep.
so but that became like the thing that we had always a screenshot of Darius with Quilletta, with Quilletta, right? Like as much as possible in the
That was
wireframes. Like
actually
you're
my
gonna
next
approve this,
question
right?
on the doc. So how does baby making actually work?
Since you wrote the book on it.
I've read about it. I've done some research, but really,
It's all theoretical still, I think.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's really delved into that very well. There's definitely not
Yeah.
an entire genre of entertainment about it.
I have to say, I know Vivi put a ton of work in on that, on the world building, making sure that all came together. And it's so fascinating for me, still seeing to this day, like huge like posts go up on Reddit with people talking about like, oh, I just noticed this on the card art of this, and then this pulls together into this and actually ties into the lore like this. And seeing these things, it's so fascinating seeing that it is being thought of on this. Because I remember like going through and talking to artists about like, oh, is this thing in there to imply that? And they're like, oh, and they start like making it bigger and better, and it's so cool to see how everything ties together. It makes me go back to when I was a kid. I used to love reading these basically choose your own adventure books, but they were a step up from that. They were like RPGs, like Lone Wolf and Cub and stuff like that, and ones that actually carried like you had inventory and hit points, and they would carry through multiple books, and it was so great. But the thing was like the first page on them would always be a big map. And you could start seeing like, oh, and sometimes I would actually like trace around to see where I was going and all the choices I would make. And it brings so much more to it. It just grounds you into the story.
I mean, like actually some of the most popular IPs in the world have very well established maps. Like
Yep.
Lord of the Rings, like we referenced Lord of the Rings, we referenced Game of Thrones. We referenced like a couple of different even like World of Warcraft, like so like there is that helps contextualize the world for people. And so and what we were seeing was that there was this a very like there was discrepancies in like how people were understanding our world. It was very fractured. Like and we had a original concept of what the world was, when the game came out, and then that evolved after many years of our game also evolving and our lore evolving as well. So but we weren't surfacing that in a visual way for players to follow that along. And so as a result, you would see across like Reddit and social, like just social media in general, all these different types of you know player-made maps of what Runeterra would look like, and they were nowhere near close to. I mean, there's some areas that were pretty close, and then there's a lot of areas that were really wrong. And so we started seeing that as a need to, to solve that problem for people. And I would say that as a company, I would argue that we were also very um, wary about putting stakes in the ground and saying these events happen in this X, Y, and coordinate kind of thing. That was actually quite a bit of a, a challenge for us to overcome as a team, to say like this is okay for us to do. This is not going to cause any player pain or um, block us from doing X and Y. So and yeah, I was gonna say like that. Those were really interesting challenges that we were um, facing for sure.
Yeah. And I definitely see that, right. Like the longer you take to fix a problem like that, the more of a problem it's going to be down the line, because you start having people like you said they start forming those conceptions in their head, like this is what everything should look like. And it's some of the reason why some people don't like this is a bit of a tangent, but don't like movies about books or like audiobooks even, because it ruins their conceptions on what this thing should be. Like a lot of the arguments I have about, or my friends have about against audiobooks, are like, oh, that's not what Hermione sounds like, or that's not what so and so sounds like. And it translates over to the movies, maybe not as much, because movies are a bit more of a curated experience where you just get that and that's it. There's not much room for imagination. But yeah, that's what it made me think of when you're talking about the player made maps, where they were starting to generate their own things, and you're like, this really isn't what it is, but we don't really have anything there to prove you wrong yet. So go wild.
And not only are the events like the maps are incorrect, that means that whenever you're telling stories, you're confusing the player, because they're having a misconception of like where things are actually taking place geographically versus like where events are actually taking place, right? And so also Runeterra as a lore, as an IP, is really complicated. You have things like capitals, factions, and continents that have the same name, but they mean different things. Like an example could be Shurima is a continent in Runeterra, but it's also a faction of Runeterra, or a region. And then also there is the Shuriman Sun Disk in the middle as a capital, not as a capital, but essentially kind of like a very important landmark of this group of people. And so how do you communicate that basically one word can mean, not necessarily mean three different things, but they have like within context, there's information there that you need to understand, or that Shrima is so close to that there's like a little section about Shrima that's kind of hanging off from the continent, that is like basically where the oh my god, I'm blanking out.
Acathia?
Yes, thank you.
Acathia?
Or Acathia is like in that like little chunk there, and then like obviously then the rest of that is jungle territory. So like, and then being able to kind of like conceptualize that, and how that's as a whole biome is very different than like way up north, like tundra, like uh oh my god, I'm like really blanking out on the lore here. Freljord, thank you. And so like how it's really interesting to see that it really tells a story, and it kind of like helps you really understand the world. One thing that I do want to say that I want to make clear is I didn't like design the world. Like there's a game designer that literally like made like the topography, the landscape, like based on every single piece of information that we have of our world, stories, bios, like video, everything. She was able to then like create the essentially like the world of Runeterra as we see it. And then from there, our work was, okay, how do we like make sure that players are essentially getting the right kind of density of information at every zoom level, because you can zoom in and out of this app. And so being able to like say at this level we surface like really big stuff, and then as you start getting closer to the world, you start getting into the details of the world. So we start surfacing more information that's more specific to like where you're tunneling to. And then and so that's the kind of work that I was also doing, as well as what kind of how can we build systems so it's easier for then the team to push content into the map if they want to do that, that then that content goes out to players. So like new story comes out, it also gets like an X and Y coordinate on the map, and then they can actually discover the content through the map. They don't really need to discover it through the League of Legends client or the homepage of the universe website, et cetera, et cetera. Or they can maybe tether from different content beats in the actual map experience. And so that's the kind of work that really was more about like the UX. And also the fact that you could do mobile and desktop.
And that's a good point that illustrates that UX isn't just about things like a website or an application. It's not just that. I'm trying to think of a good way to say it. It's not just about like an asset that you make, because Vivi said, what if a story comes out? How do we push that through? Like that's a process. That's not really like, yeah, you can have a tool or something that does do it, that is an asset, but the actual idea of having a user experience designer look at the process and flow of what you do and what you're trying to get out of it, like that is also UX, right? Like that goes back to what Chris said. It's always fun to ask because it's so flexible. You hardly ever get the same answer twice. So
it's such a wide field. It does feel like maybe it's because it's not in its infancy, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But this sort of way of looking at UX, in from my understanding, is fairly new in the industry, of having like dedicated UX designers going through and actually designing the user experience. Because I think beforehand, and correct me if I'm wrong because I could be way off base, but beforehand it was sort of just like an aspect of other jobs that they would go through, and they would sort of like a game designer might go through and be like, oh, I want this to be like this, and then sort of patch it through. But now we've sort of had this specific job role in a company to go through and actually design those experiences and work with the other teams to do so. And I wonder if it's going to get more and more focused as time goes on, where we'll have. You don't think so?
It's actually my understanding is it's something people learned they needed to do. Chris will obviously have way more history there, but like it translated at least in games as accessibility. And I think the game designers have really good chops of what accessibility is in gaming. I think, and then also it translated as like more clear and usable UI. So then that fell into the like UI bucket of like artists to be able to exercise those UX muscles and like be able to come up with solutions that were more clear for the audience. However, there's a whole like component on like human computer interaction, how people interact with things, the psychology behind it, the behaviors, like when you're interacting with these things, like that is basically a science in there. And that's something that I haven't seen a like essentially like other discipline to do it. And instead the UX designer is inheriting all of that responsibility. I now have to be an expert in UX research. I also have to be able to do like conduct these studies, or come up with wireframes, right? And then also do the visual design look and feel of that, and then sometimes I am starting to see the trend now of now I have to be able to code it. And like that the UX engineer as a title is a thing now, and I'm like, oh my god, like at some point, I'm just gonna I'm just a sponge right now of
You're just
absorbing
acquiring more
responsibility.
skills, more
Which
skills.
right, which what that really means is that it's gonna provide less time for me to actually do what I should be doing, which is ensuring that the core experience has been thought through from end to end. Instead, if I'm spending most of my time coding that experience, you know, or like, you know, doing like the look and feel over here or whatever, of course, I need to understand basic principles and language to be able to talk to developers and then artists and stuff like that about how these things are um, being built so that I can come up with solutions that work for them too. But um, yeah, I am definitely also seeing the trend where all of a sudden, like I'm like the UX designer is inheriting a lot of other responsibilities, and that is
Yeah.
an interesting trend to say the
Yeah.
least. I think
It-
Chris probably had something
Yeah.
too.
Oh,
One
yeah.
of the, I mean, yeah, it's really interesting to me because if people try to think of it as like, here's the thing that I do, whenever people hear a job title, like you have an idea, like someone says fireman, you know what they do. Someone says coder, you know what they do. But with UX, I mean, it's so broad where like I've run like multiple departments at once doing the one thing there. But if you say someone's in UX, I mean, you could have someone doing ethnographic research, going out and living with people and figuring out their lives for a little. You have someone who's like coding and building prototypes. You have someone who's designing interfaces. You have someone who's building structured wireframes underneath on this. And it could be any one of those at any given point in time, or it could be one person doing all of those, depending on the size of the company and what they're trying to accomplish. It's so broad, and it's honestly only getting broader because, like I said, like we've mostly been talking about what's called product design when you're
Mhm.
designing a thing, like if it's a game or a device or something like that. But there's also service design, which is a level beyond that, where there's no physical thing to interact with. Like one of the ones that I was working with before was Bank of America did this Keep the Change program, where uh, whenever you make a payment on something, it rounds up to the nearest dollar and puts that in your savings account to help you save. That's an experience. There's no product, there's no thing, there's no interface. It's just a service that goes in there. And then there's also environmental design, and then there's also, experiences, and then there's organizational design. How does a company work and do all that? And these all fall under it. And it's so broad, but there's one specific process that you follow regardless of what the problem you're tackling is to make sure that you're solving the right problem, you're testing all the right solutions, and that they're actually effective.
It's it could be just because if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and since I'm in production, I always see something related to production. But it's the same idea as like producers. For me, it boils down to basically organizational skills, right? Like that's kind of at its core what it's about. It's about organizing either a team or a small group of people or project, right? That's what it kind of boils down to. But whenever you say, oh, we have someone who just organizes stuff, that sounds really weird. You would think that everyone should be able to have some basic organization skill, right? Like, so I view it in a very similar lens where it's like not to the same degree. I think that to Chris's point and Vivi's point, it is becoming broader and broader and broader. I see that eventually, though, people across all disciplines will have some sort of UX skill. I think that is inevitable, especially with the way that the world is going and the industry is going. I have to think about how I interact with people, like on a what do you call it, one-to-one basis. Also, how I interact with the team and what communication what communication tools do I use, and looking at from that lens, I am trying to think about the experience of the people that I'm working with. So I understand kind of where you're coming from, Ben, where it makes sense that like people are starting to like put a lot of focus on user experience. So like, yes, there are user experience designers on teams that are meant to focus on that, but what they're asked to being focused on just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And
There's
that's
so much
I
misconception
think
around it too.
where some of the outsider's perspective comes in, because like when like exactly what Chris was saying, I motioned to the wrong side. Exactly what Chris was saying.
Well,
When
the
you
wrong
say like
side,
a
my
fire
end.
person or a mail person or a coder, you know exactly like what that person does. And that's like, I think that's the major problem with UX design for people trying to look in and see what it is. Nobody knows what it is. Like, unless you're
Mhm.
doing it,
Yeah.
nobody really knows what is going on.
Like
and
that's
that's
like
actually
the name. I would say like the name I like experience designer. I design user experiences, right? Like I know, like I'm knowing these two and listening to them and being, I'm like, yeah, okay, that is exactly, yes, that describes what they do. I can't think of another way to describe what they do. But at the same time, people go like, what does that mean?
what is it?
Like it means exactly what it means, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
One thing that
Yeah.
I do want to add real quick is that um, previously, like previously on 24.
On the
No,
last
not
episode.
immediately. um, but the when other people were doing UX, let's say a game designer is doing UX or a UI artist is doing UX and stuff like that. Um, I think that sometimes when your main focus is or your expertise is one field and you have to exercise um, your this other skill, there's going to be an off balance of what you're focusing your attention to. So if you're a game designer, you're going to definitely over index on the game design of things. If you're a UI artist, you're going to definitely over index on look and feel. You're going to make things look and feel the vision that you want players to receive. Um, if you're let's say your business goals, right, in your in let's say you want to increase the amount of friendship request or something like that. Like that's your like business goal and designer, like we want to do this. Go. Um my whole job is always in in the best intentions of players' hearts. Like I want to be able to have empathy for that group of people and always advocate for that group of people. I will always be that one person that's pushing business goals and it's going to be like no like that's not a good experience because of X and Y. If we let's work together until we can have business goals or we can create an experience where business goals align with players expectations with player needs so that it's a positive experience for players and it's also beneficial for the company, generate red video, etc. you know
Mhm.
and that is also hard to do when your job is to advocate for them and you're pushing a lot. So and that can potentially be um harder to do if you're balancing other parts of your job to be like, but I also have to do this level or this like, new weapon or blah blah blah. And then but I also have to do maybe the UI in the specific way because X and Y reasons or whatever. So like I just want to point out that like there is definitely a lot of strong value in like having a UX designer to be like in your team to be focusing and being that champion of the player experience because their whole job is that they have a ton of tools and processes that allow them to take their own bias out of the equation and create solutions that best fit the target audience's
Yeah.
uh users, goals and needs. So
I I completely agree with all. It's one of the things that I would joke about is saying that like I would love a future where my job does not exist because everyone just has those skills. But on the same token, like having someone who focuses on that gives that bigger picture so that if someone who's like, coding this weapon or this character or whatever, they're thinking about that, but then the greater narrative person can step in and go, "Oh, hey, this is how it ties in. We need sure it balances on that." I think for people who understand what UX is or like have that idea in there, they think like the first thing that comes to mind is empathy, having empathy for that user, understanding what it's like coming from there. And that's important. But I think something that's equally as important is what I call the spider web, where if
Mm.
you imagine all the people who are going to be interacting with something just sitting around a table and there are lines connecting all of them, if you focus on this person and start designing it to make an amazing experience for them, it's going to pull from all the other people. So how do you start balancing all this so that everyone gets the optimal experience possible throughout the entire thing?
That's a hard problem to solve, I imagine.
That's why we have jobs.
Yeah, I mean, like, for I'm trying to think, like, oh yeah, I could say that. For Runeterra, we had bucketed, like, this was kind of like a general understanding of group of people. Like, we obviously have your hyper engaged League of Legends players, but they're not necessarily hyper engaged lore, you know, advocates, right? Or so we were just trying to get a better feel of like who that audience was, because as rioters we may have a very clear understanding of the world, and we may have our own little biases in terms of like how things should work. And actually some of that even gets sprinkled across, like, the way that we navigate on the site and the client. And there's an inherent, like, um I guess, like, notion that you know what champions are, you know what regions are, and that's how you navigate across the universe site. But as a new player that's completely learning, especially like in being introduced to the world of Runeterra through Legends of Runeterra, through Wild Rift, through, let's say, the TV show, like, there is a world where you might not know exactly what that is first. And because the characters look visually different across the different games, you could potentially say, "Hey, I don't I like this character this in this Awaken video of League of Legends. He had like I mean, he was like on a piano. I don't really know his name though. And but I want to learn more about him. How the heck would you be able to do that?" As a writer, I may be like, "Yeah, you go to the champions page and you go down to like, Jin, and then you're there, right?" As a very hyper engaged player, you might know that too. As a new player or a new not even player, because you may not play League of Legends. You might see, wow,
Mhm.
that video is bomb, and I want to learn more about characters. How would you even do that? And so being able to do exercises and facilitate conversations around like, hey, like, there's like all these different ways of like of wanting to learn more about the world, right? That's not just like champion centric from like League of Legends, but more like there's an interest there, and I want to learn more, but I don't know these things. How do you facilitate it? How do you like surface the right kind of information so people can make the decisions that they want to make and find the information that they want to discover? And that's ultimately like why UX is so hard, is because you're trying to take yourself out of the equation. You're trying to put other people instead, and advocating for a group of people that might not be you.
Yeah. Tiny tangent off that. I really like how you brought that up, because this might be an example of UX, a good UX, because there is a feature on Amazon Prime Video, which I don't think is a very widely used way to get content. I think most people use like Disney, YouTube, or Netflix or something. But Amazon Prime has this feature, and I haven't seen it on any other site. It's called
X-ray?
X-Ray. Yeah, X-Ray.
Yep.
And it's awesome because you can just click pause at any time and see who the actor on screen is, like what other roles they could have been in, what other like major things. And then like I would love that feature in everything. Like everything should have that feature. I don't know. I'm sure it would
But
be an absolute.
there's a business component that makes sense for Amazon Prime to have it, that perhaps it doesn't make sense on Netflix, as an example.
Mhm.
Amazon probably wants you to say, "Hey, check out the other stuff that they're in, go buy it."
Mhm.
It's
So
funny
there's
for me because I actually designed that interface many years ago.
No way,
It never
really?
saw the light of day, mind you. Yeah, it was for Philips Home Theater PC that they came out with many years ago. And like you said, they need to have a business case behind it. But the whole thing was people would be going through and scanning different things. So you could pause at any point in time. And what it would do is tell you, yes, who's on there, but also what they're wearing, what that thing is that they're working with. And you could buy it all right there. So they get a cut. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like that kind of stuff doesn't make sense on Netflix because you don't buy their movies, right? That's not part of
Well,
their business model.
Wait, you don't?
However, but however, I would argue that Disney Plus could explore something like that and tie it
Yeah.
to their greater ecosystem, like their stores, like whatever that may be. An opportunity
Disney
to
definitely has
explore that.
enough merchandise.
They
Yeah.
totally
could-
do, and so
Yeah.
like that's like that's the part where like sure it's a thing that could be a part of your experience. It's itself. Is there, and then how do you balance business goals with player needs, and like how do you make sure that you justify this over something else, right?
Mhm.
Because there's always that delicate, excuse me, like
Spiderweb.
balance, not balance. No, not spiderweb. The there's multiple things you could be doing at a given
Yeah.
time, right? And so there's that feature. Like, let's say you were to include X-ray in Netflix, but maybe Netflix wants to, but at the same time, that team can be investing in something entirely different. And if they think that that other thing has way more value overall and more of a business case, then they're gonna double down on that one.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm. Which
that's
is
the other part in the business.
product, which is product management, which is
Yeah.
another. There's this a whole other.
That's another
field.
confusing and scary area of the business and game design world. Shoot, I was gonna say something about this.
Taco
Okay,
Bell.
Taco, exactly.
okay,
Taco Bell.
Let's
talk about Taco
I was
Bell.
just wondering.
They just got rid of the 7-layer burrito.
Yeah.
And I'm furious.
Well,
Just
I
got
mean,
like 10
I
things
don't
off their
care.
menu.
I don't care about
Crazy.
Yeah,
Taco.
right. Well, let's talk about the
Really?
user experience of the 7-layer burrito.
Yeah.
Let's,
So when you
let's talk
open Taco
What?
Bell 7-layer burrito, you
Let's
get this
start with Georgie.
paper
Why are you opening your burrito? What?
to see
User
what's
experience,
inside.
yeah, I have to verify that there are 7 layers.
Yeah,
to-
Yeah.
This is really funny, only because Chris, our friend, and I were just talking about eating tacos, and like not that long ago, we were talking about
Oh,
like
that's
how
right.
you're supposed to eat it top down, and then you're like, but who really does that?
No.
Wait, excuse me. Let's take one step back. How are you supposed to eat tacos?
This is the real topic about. This is a real topic about.
Did you said
experience
top
There you go.
down?
eating
Did
a
you mean
taco.
like?
Yeah, like.
Did you mean like
heart.
Yeah,
like a corn on the
Yep.
cob? Like
not to the side like a lot
Yeah.
of people do, but like
Yeah, like.
yeah.
Who's making this decision?
Nobody does
Well,
that.
that's a clear example of you design
I
it
love
one
it.
way, but your
And people
user
use
base
it
do it
a
differently.
different way.
Is there a
Yeah.
big
It's really
taco?
interesting picture that's a meme usually of like you have like a pretty sidewalk with like I forget like it's stones or whatever. It's like a walkway and it says like you it says like visual design or whatever. I don't know what it says, right? But then there's like a path that's like just like
Dead grass.
dead
Between
grass
it,
because
yeah.
people have been walking through it over and over, and
Yeah.
that says UX.
User
And it's
user
basically
experience.
because
Yeah.
like literally like and that actually happened at Riot in the campus too. Like, they designed this campus and then you had like is it cobblestone? I don't know. Like the stones and you're stepping over right low paths. Like that.
Yeah.
And they were
It's-
ignored.
So
And
so
people were
literally
walking-
here I'll show you. So like there's a path that does like so you come out of an exit here and then it does this number, like it kind of does this weird little like swoop. People would just get out and just go straight over, like they would ignore this little, so like this all the grass would just die, and then like a month later they just put stepping stones like right here.
Yeah, there's
So
The
like
audio-
a
people just
lot
use
of
it.
little stepping stones, like
Yeah.
right, like basically where people just made their own path, and I was like, ooh,
Yeah.
like
The audio listeners love this part of the podcast.
Yeah,
This is the
exactly.
part in UX
Yeah.
design where you iterate. Like we haven't actually talked about that, right? You create
Mm.
products, but then you learn about how people use them. And then you have to make like, is it performing well? Cool. If it's underperforming, you have to iterate. And so in this particular example with the campus, the iteration was okay, well then we're just gonna have to create new pathways for people. And it's actually where people were walking. And then you put stones there, and then people were walking there, and then cool, you fixed it, and then you move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What Vivi's describing is one of the biggest memes in the UX world. Like on the groups, you'll see that image so many times where it just happens. And there's a famous research example of that where I forget which university it was, but a university they didn't put any sidewalks in. They just had the big open fields and put all the buildings in. And then they waited one semester to see where everyone
Oh,
walked and
wow.
then just paved those paths. And
Oh wow.
it was
Okay.
I
perfect.
love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's great. Yeah.
So okay, we're 99% of the way there. So let's just take the jump. Let's talk about UX outside of games and outside of like design. Let's talk about like UX in the real world because we're basically talking about it right now. Do we want to start with the Disneyland example, or do we want to just work our way up to there?
Oh! I got one because I love hearing Vivi and Chris go off about it. Well, I guess more Vivi than anything else. Doors.
Oh no!
Specifically.
For audio
Specifically,
listeners, Vivi just had a very exasperated look on her face.
I
remember
was
her-
excited about Disney, and then this guy says doors. and
I'm just
like,
saying, it's one of the funniest things I
Doors.
remember listening to Vivi rant about is talking about like opening a door, like the user experience, like just going to like just think about it. You're out somewhere going to a building, and there's a push bar. Well, not even a push bar. There's just a bar there. Like, how do you open that
yeah,
door?
it just says open, and you're like trying to figure out if you have to push or pull, and if you don't have confidence in one, well, actually, it's not even that. It's like you'll try one, it doesn't work, then you try the other, and then it does, and then that happens often.
Yeah.
So it's
And
like the
already
USB.
kind of like,
It's the USB equivalent where you'll plug it in. You're like, oh man,
100%.
and then
You're always
what?
like, ah, dang it.
Yeah.
Yep. And you have
Yeah, I
those
mean, like-
signs that say like, no, seriously, push on this door because they don't work the first time. Like, oh,
Yeah.
come on.
That's like a Band-Aid solution.
Oftentimes, it's always like a really pretty door, like it's a beautifully designed door, but in terms of not functionality, but like aesthetics, right? And then, but the door handle makes it look like you have to pull it, but actually it was a push. And you're like, and that happens.
Yeah.
That does happen, and it's little more. I don't actually even call those out anymore, Larry. Why are you calling me
It's
out?
just because it was like I remember you went on a half an hour rant about
Yeah, I
it
was
one
reading
time.
a book. I was reading
Yeah.
The Don Norman book, and that was
Yeah.
a
Oh,
chapter, and I was
design
like,
of
oh
everyday
yeah,
things.
the doors, yeah.
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 And I was like, it always stuck out to me, and I was like, yeah, I never thought of it that way. So anyway, okay, let's talk about Disney.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Disney time.
Actually, my favorite examples to give of the worst UX that will never change are ATMs and gas pumps. Those have always been and will always be horrible experiences that you can't figure out, just a grid of everything looking the same, and it looks awful. And the reason why it will never improve is because the people who are installing these are just like, yeah, whatever the cheapest option is. I'm just trying to make money here. They don't care.
I argue very strongly that it will change because both ATMs and gas pumps are on their way out. I'm making the argument right now.
So they won't.
We're
They'll
moving
just
into a
die.
cashless society. Cash is on its way. Come on. Are you serious? You think in 50 years we're gonna be carrying out little pieces of paper? No.
Yeah.
And then hopefully,
because people are stupid. Like that's just we don't like change. How long has currency been a thing? Forever.
well, currency
This
is not going
this is me
away.
just-
The
this
way
is
that
me
you
being
hold
contrarian.
it is going away. Like,
all right.
You're gonna
50
have a
years, we're gonna
card.
come back. All right.
or no, it's all gonna be
50,
in your
50
phone.
years.
50 years.
Yeah, 50 years.
Yeah.
50
Dev
years.
dive.
We're 50 years.
Put it in the
Dev
calendar now.
dive 2052. We're gonna come back. I'm gonna set a Google
And it's the
reminder on my
same.
calendar.
It's 30 years, but you know what? We'll have a check-in. It's okay.
Yeah, I
Wait.
would love to see those things die. If we do switch over to fully electric or automated, that would get rid of that. And if we switch over to just doing things on our phone and everything independent, that would get rid of that. But there's a lot between now and that happening.
The
getting there.
examples that
I'm
like
gonna
annoy me
prove
now,
you
like,
guys
it's
wrong.
Larry, the door is so outdated. It's all about LA parking signs now, okay?
Oh,
Those
jeez.
are
Wait,
awful.
who parks anymore, Vivi? When's the last time you parked somewhere?
Last year? But
man.
It's
actually,
never gonna
that
end.
was- Wait.
Yeah.
Am I
I've
actually-
started.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's that meme of just like you see the sign and it's like 8 signs high of like a million things that you have to remember from
Yeah.
one to the next everything. Someone designed a better one that some cities have started implementing now. It's just one sign with basically
It's a
like a
grid.
week map that you see
Yeah.
like the green areas and red areas, and you know it, and yay.
Chicago has
yeah.
a really nice one. Like I was like, okay, so it's not a big city problem. It's the LA. It's just this implementing probably some pretty dark patterns here.
Oh,
Because holy
Yeah.
hell. Actually,
So-
I also heard things like
I wanted to say, before we get too into it, the problem with the signs is that they're just confusing. Like, no parking between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. on Wednesdays. But if it's a Good Friday, then you can park at 2 p.m. But only if your car is green, and only if it's an
Yeah.
actual green car, not like electrically friendly to the
and
environment.
if it's a leap
yeah.
year.
And if it's
Yeah,
a leap
leap
year,
year.
yeah,
And then
Yeah.
just unless it's a Saturday.
yeah.
It's
Oh,
just
not on
like-
Saturdays.
What?
Not
Like
on
what?
Saturdays. There's also like because a lot of people have to rely on street parking to get to businesses and stuff like
street
that.
sweepers.
And some of these street parkings are like in residential areas. There's also permits, right? And like you can't actually park there. I had no idea this was a permit zone. What the hell? Like the sign
Yeah.
doesn't even say anything, but I guess I need to know that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a
There
mess.
goes that ticket.
Yeah.
It's one of the
And this-
reasons I don't mind as much not having a car anymore.
Mhm.
And having to do with all
and
that
actually talking
bullcrap.
about business cases, they have a strong business case to not fix it because that means they would reduce revenue because people wouldn't be getting as many tickets.
Yeah,
Yep.
I've seen some conspiracies about that where people are saying like they aren't fixing confusing signs because like exactly what you said, where they're getting more tickets. And I don't know how much I
That's-
believe that, but maybe.
Say
Yeah.
that's
I don't
probably
think it's an
closer
evil
to dark patterns.
conspiracy, but yeah, it's more of like it just started out and it got confusing, and then people just don't have any incentive to fix it, and laziness
Mhm.
wins out. So
I guess that's true.
Yeah.
All right, so Disneyland or Disney World or
Disney.
Disney in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
Disney.
Yeah.
So yeah, we flirted with it a bit, but why is Disneyland and Disney World and these theme parks, why are they so different from other examples? Like, why have they been designed with this user experience in mind so much? And like, how do you notice that from even somebody who doesn't really understand what's going on with user experience?
That's the trick. You don't notice it.
Well, that's the
honestly
point.
one
Like,
of the things. Yeah. So Walt Disney really cared about details, and he cared about the experience and how it all came together. Like if you go, I love theme parks. I have since I was a little kid. I'm a big enthusiast about them. If you go to a Six Flags or something like that, you go there, you ride amazing coasters. They're great. They'll scare you, and then it's kind of like you're walking through this weird post-apocalyptic area after that to the next to the next amazing roller coaster. Whereas if you go to Disney, it's less about a thrill ride and more about everything along the way. If you look at all the little, because they have all the different lands in there. One of my favorite things to do, and we've talked about this, Vivi and I have talked about this, and Larry talked about this before, is like find the transition areas between lands, and you'll start seeing how they morph into one another smoothly, things you would have never noticed before. How it's part one land and part the next land as you're walking through, little things like that. And there's this phrase I can't remember right now that Walt did that he always used whenever he was designing the parks, and it's hilarious now, but it was basically like you always have to be able to see a weenie. And the reason for
Yeah.
this is because he would just walk around and stop somewhere, and wherever you were, you have to be able to see just a weenie stand, a hot dog stand, so that wherever you were, there's always something to consume, something to do, something. There was no just dead zone where you were like, oh, where am I? What's going on? Wherever you are, if you stop in a Disney park, there will be something amazing going on around you. And that detail really takes it to the next level.
That principle, because that's actually part of like the Disney Imagineers have what's called the Mickey 10 Commandments. And so those are like literally design principles that they use in order to craft like, experiences. I know the Mickey 10 Commandments.
Hail
so one
Satan!
of them-
Sorry, that's
what-
I can't.
Oh my
I'm
god.
sorry. I'm
One of
sorry.
them-
It's a joke.
One of them is still the weenie, and that's been morphed more into like a point of interest that you want users to follow
Mhm.
and kind of guide them through the park. So as I'm, when I enter, let's say Disneyland in Main Street, the first thing, at least in Christmas, is going to be the giant Christmas tree there. And then the next, and when I make it to that point, the next weenie is actually the castle, because as I walk down Main Street, the biggest thing that I see is going to be the Aurora's castle. when I start getting closer to Aurora's castle, then I get split into different directions. But the most immediate weenie is actually going to be Space Mountain. And so, like, you start literally, or Matterhorn or something like that, and you, I know, right? And you start literally kind of like guiding people, and it's a way almost to guide the traffic on the park, so that certain areas start like, so you start kind of like predicting where the traffic is going, and then people can then like offset like with maybe character experiences here, so that you can start pulling people into a different area, so then it evens out the traffic and stuff like that. um and you can potentially use that, like, let's say in a 3D environment in a video game, you can use that by saying, I'm going to put really interesting points of interest in the world, so that you can, run up to that thing, and now you see something cooler, and then you go over there, and you're basically guiding people throughout an experience.
Can you tell that Vivi's been to Disneyland a couple times? Just a
few
few
times
from memory. From memory, being able to tell you the first, I don't know, 500 yards of what you're gonna see.
I've been to Disneyland once, and it was when I was interviewing for my current job out here. I flew out here and stayed with a couple friends, and we went to Disneyland. And I'm actually just struggling to like recall even the basic structure of the park. I'm like, so the parking lot, the entrances, because there's like Disneyland on this side and California Adventure on this side, and there's like a big space between those two.
I have to understand that my godparents, I have to thank my godmother specifically for this, because she found, I don't know how her love for Disney started, but she was very much like telling my parents, you need to take this girl to Disney. And I was 3. And then they were like, she's not going to remember. She's like, sure she will. And then, like, I forget how that happened, but like she got my parents to, I think she either paid for the Disney part or something, but like my parents took a vacation there, took me there. And some of my strongest memories of Disney are still from that 3-year-old me.
Wow.
My favorite character, and granted, obviously 3-year-old memory is very different than obviously what's reality, but like what I will say is like Epcot Center became a very strong like mark in my or an imprint in my brain in my lifetime, because that's where I got introduced to my favorite character, Figment. He's a figment of your imagination. I didn't know what the word figment meant in back when I was 3, let alone like English language back then. So I was like, cool dragon, he's cute, and he bit my hand because he's a puppet, and ow, but he's cool and I like him. And then funny enough, as a designer, how like the figment of your imagination is my favorite like character in Disney, which is crazy. But and how that transitioned into like now they're like scientists, and like his ride is more about like discovering like imagination inside of you, and like how do you like create things that, and I'm like, oh my god, my hope, my life. But yeah, no, like for me, living in Puerto Rico and flying to Florida for vacation was a very common thing that we did. And in fact, before I moved to the States, I had been to uh, Disney World, I think 3 times, 4 times. And so, and then since then, I've gone like 5 more times, like between Disneyland and Disney World. Chris, Larry, and I went to China at some point. We went to Shanghai Disney. Like, part of the appeal now is to compare the different parks and see what the experiences are, what cultural, how culture changes the experience between the different parks. Like in China, the parks, the Shanghai Disney has a lot more theater type of shows, because that's more appealing to the group of people. And the audience in Shanghai Disney is not going to be mostly tourists; it's going to be mostly mainland China that's going to go in there. Whereas with whereas California is mostly California residents, and whereas Walt Disney World is mostly a global, visitor group base, and that's because of the way that it's been marketed, right? And so to then compare those differences is quite interesting. And so yeah, I kind of I kind of have a really good understanding of the park.
It's true. I've been doing that. I've been trying to go to visit all of them around the world, because I've been to the 2 in California, the 4 in Florida, the 2 in Tokyo, the one in Shanghai. All that's left now, I think, is Hong Kong and Paris. And you're completely right. Like seeing the different ones. So my first time going to Disney was Disneyland, and I went there with a friend who was born and raised in LA, and so he went there a lot growing up over his entire childhood. And so when we went, he was a guide. Like he went there. It's like, yeah. So right now we need to go here to get this fast pass for this, and so this, and he knew he had the entire experience fully optimized, so that you got to do everything you wanted to in a single day to pull it together. And the rest of us was like, how do you even know all this stuff? Going amazing. And then I went with that same guy, and we went to Tokyo. We went to Tokyo Disney Sea, and all of a sudden, like seeing him, his brain just start glitching out. It's like, no, I'm here, but I don't know what to do. This is how everyone else feels. How do I do this? It was hilarious to watch, but you're completely right. Like there were a lot more shows in the China one, and in Japan, there's a lot more games, like games to play where you try to knock things over and do stuff like that, and there would be long lines at those games because that's something that they really enjoy. And seeing how they cater to the local culture was really fascinating because they care about those details of the experience.
My favorite part of the Shanghai park was like it wasn't even close to closing. It was like a couple hours before the park closed. Yeah, and the Tron ride was there, and we were like, oh, we really liked the Tron ride. That was cool. We rode it once. There was a line, and then we're like, okay, we'll come back at the end of the day. And we came back. Yeah, it was like 5 or 6 o'clock. No one was there. We literally just rode the ride 5 times in a row.
I think 6. Yeah.
yeah.
Everyone was at the Pirates. Everyone was actually in the Pirates theater, like stunt show. That was the thing too. It was either that one
was
or the
their
musical.
Yeah, and it was just funny. It got to the point when we were on the Tron ride that we did different poses for the cameras. That was
so good.
I need to go back and do that again. Anyway,
I've only been to a few parks.
Here, here, US.
There is. I've been to Disneyland. Obviously, I mentioned that. Busch Gardens, which is in Virginia, Williamsburg, Virginia, and then
Tampa.
I haven't been to that one. I was planning to go to that one this year, but maybe.
Oh yeah, why? What happened?
I don't know. There's been some. I think a couple people have like a cough or something.
It's
a whole thing.
Oh, okay. All right. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I've only been to like three parks total. And one of the experiences was amazing because it was just that the entire time. There was nobody it wasn't empty, but there was no line longer than 3 or 4 minutes for any ride in the park. And this was like an actual ride park. It was not Busch Gardens, the other one. I cannot think of it off the top of my head for some reason.
Tree Gardens.
Tree Gardens. That's exactly it. Larry, you're always so quick with the correct answer. That I really.
Are you looking at Six Flags, Kings Island?
No. It's not. It's a local one. If I look, I'm gonna look it up right now. Virginia theme park. I'll look it up because I won't be happy until King's Dominion. King's Dominion.
Okay. I've heard of that one. Okay. Yeah.
And it's basically just a roller coaster park. There's not much else to do there other than roller coasters, and they have some really, really big ones. And me and my friend, we went. It was like a Thursday afternoon or something. So it was the middle of the week, and there was nobody in the entire park, and it was amazing. You would just walk on any ride you want, ride the ride. The only lines that would be like maybe there'd be a 3 or 4 person line for the front car because everyone wanted to ride in the front car. So yeah, it really spoiled me for theme parks because I went to Disneyland with my friends, and they're like, "It's only a 40-minute line for Space Mountain." Oh my god!
Oh,
I'm
that's
like,
great.
No! I can't do
You know
it.
what's really crazy?
Side note.
Oh,
sorry. I was gonna say tangent. Whenever that whole thing goes away, we were talking about, we should go to Universal.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Get some butterbeer.
We'll have to go. We'll have to go during we'll have to like take off a weekday and try to go in the middle of the week, so it's not as busy.
Yeah. That's always the best time. Yeah. See, when I was a kid, I grew up loving theme parks. So both my parents are choir directors, so I grew up going to conventions and conferences, contests and stuff. And so every year we went to all 3 of the theme parks because that's where they held them. And so every year, yeah, I went to Six Flags, Worlds of Fun, and Silver Dollar City, which was previously a Dollywood, but had changed to that like 1800s themed thing. And it like the smell of hot asphalt in the summer like takes me back to childhood, and I absolutely love like yeah, doing those things and seeing it. There's so many great ones out there. I had a friend who was telling me about when he was a kid going to Action Park, which is in New Jersey, I think. There's an entire documentary about it, but it had a bunch of extremely unsafe rides, and people were constantly getting hurt on them. Like they had a water slide with a loop in it and things like that.
Okay.
And
Sounds awesome.
yeah, I think the
Solid.
nicknames for it
Solid.
were like Traction Park or Class Action Park.
Oh no.
But yeah, they eventually got shut down. But there's an entire documentary about it and everything. It's absolutely fascinating.
I want to go. Let's go. When are we going?
Not
To
quite.
ride, let's
Traction
ride the
Park.
water
Yeah.
slide with the loop in it.
Yeah. Well, that closed down in the 80s, but
Oh,
yeah.
damn. All right, he's got a time machine.
I was gonna say, to go back a little bit on like what makes Disney have like really good experiences.
Oh, yeah.
I know, right? Bringing it back, guys.
That's my job
Topic.
usually.
I think about Galaxy's Edge a lot, obviously, because that's like the closest. Sorry, the most recent Disney park experience that I've had. Um, Spoiler alert for people that have not been there, but there is a lot going on there. It's very, very much like the design, the architecture, the concept of like being in a Star Wars universe like planet, right? And what that means is taken very seriously. The the fact that you go to a cast member and their uniform is now matching the world that they're, the fantasy, right? Um, the language that they use now is a little different, right? Like we're
Mhm.
not actually saying dollars anymore. I forget. I think they're saying credits.
Credits.
Yeah,
Credits,
They say
right? Because
credits.
they
Yeah.
had a different. I think they had a different word, and then they had to go back to credits. Um, the the idea that now like the drinks that I have there have to be a part of this universe. So like the blue milk, green milk
Mhm.
thing, right? But also very much like how do we make sure that everyone can try this, right? Like that there's no like food allergies. So they went for the plant-based approach, right? So that they didn't have so that people that may want to have or that may have dietary restrictions can still participate in this experience just like someone that didn't, right? And then there's alcoholic versions of that in Disney World. And then the idea that when you think about Star Wars and you think about that iconic cantina, where Han Solo's there, like and wanting to experience something similar, they have that. You just have to do a line and queue up for it. But like once you get in there, they have that. And then being able to play, like kind of see and observe like that area and kind of feel like you're part of the cantina there, that felt really cool. The fantasy of building your own lightsaber and being a part of like this like secret group that's kind of being smuggled in, and then you're trying to create your lightsaber, and then you don't know if the person next to you might be actually, because they pick a red crystal, they might actually be Sith, and you might be more of like you might be more of on the rebel side. And then when you get out, perfectly timed, Kylo Ren is actually patrolling with the stormtroopers, and he starts questioning you on like who if you've seen any suspicious like like rebel activity. And like that literally happened to me and Larry last time we went with my parents, where he walks out with my dad and my mom in the new lightsaber because we ordered one for a friend, and I questioned. And then we were like, holy crap, like what do I say? And so it was funny because I was like, I don't know anything. And then one of the stormtroopers gets mad at me, right? And he's like, you're a liar, you told me blah blah. And I'm like, oh my god, right? And so like that part where like now I'm actually an actor in this world, and and it's building this fantasy, like I'm actually a part of it, like and we are in a way role playing together, and it all felt very organic. Like that's actually a very good experience for me as a visitor, right? And to fulfill this Star Wars fantasy and be connected. So even outside of the theme park, like, or sorry, the roller coaster, like attractions, there is all these little things that all contribute to the experience. um that are very fulfilling. Like I can find fulfillment even from being at one of the stores and looking at the and all the different kyber crystals and then figuring out which one I want because the cast member might be telling me about the kyber crystal or some history around it or how like uh such and such character like actually preferred this kind of crystal more, whatever that may be. They might actually engage with you in a way that might make you feel like you're part of that. One of my favorite moments last year was actually I was with my friend Kelly and I had a
Yeah.
Donald hat on and they were trying to figure out how to talk to me like, you know, Star Wars universe talk, but also like so they were trying to stay in character but highlight the fact that I have a weird hat like a weird hat on.
Creature.
So they were like trying to
Yeah.
like say like, and the thing unfortunately for me, like I'm not like that knowledgeable in the different races or like, fauna and flora in the Star Wars IP, but I was like, oh crap, like they're totally going in and I'm here like I have a Donald hat. I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
But it was still fun. And it was a fun
Yeah.
interaction. And so there's just a lot that it literally I can have a good experience. And even actually when I hit it had nothing to do. Like we weren't in line for anything. I was literally just taking pictures. Like I was like, look at these steps, Larry. Look at this like door. Look at this thing.
Even
Like it's
The
doors.
door.
yeah.
He's right. Larry was
So
right.
so, they have these fun they have a lot of cargo kind of like, sets like or props
Containers.
containers
Yeah.
and they have these like QR codes that are kind of on the
Oh,
side and you're supposed to grab your phone and like scan it with their
It's
I
like a
think
mini game.
play app and
Yeah.
it's a game that's in the Galaxy's Edge component of the park where you're trying to find out where contraband is being smuggled and you're supposed to tell on them by going to the stormtroopers and say that you're seeing like fishy activity. You're
Mhm.
also supposed to be on the lookout for a character that's a park only character that's supposed to be amongst the crowd, and if you tell on her to the stormtroopers, Kylo Ren's supposed to show up or something. Like we haven't really done that part, but like because half the time I'm like, no, I like her. Like why am I gonna tell on her? But low key also look like and kind of follow and see if someone does tell on her,
Yeah.
just to see what happens. But there's like all of these points of interest that like just draw you in. And unfortunately, that's not stuff that you see in other parks. You are starting to see that a little bit with like Universal. I would say that the Harry Potter world, the IP is just so great that like it kind of like pulls you in
Lends
the moment you
itself.
go in. You're like, oh my god,
Yeah.
there's the stores. Like you are in either Diagon Alley or the other
Hogsmeade.
place, Hogsmeade. Yes, and so
Hogsmeade.
like that feels great. But the moment that you get out and you're looking at older content, that's where it starts that kind of breaking. You start seeing it again at the line experience. At least like for instance, uh the Transformer ride, like you get to see it, like it kind of hype you up. You're in a military base, and like a lot of it, it's kind of like secret military stuff, and like Optimus Prime is telling you about like something about the Allspark, and you're like, oh shit, but then the moment that you leave, that fantasy's gone. And now I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm at a warehouse studio, like, and I get it. That's part of Universal, right? And you're supposed to kind of go into these like little movie sets and then come out, and then you're back to the real world. And then now you're going to a different movie set, aka in another attraction, right? Now I'm in Jurassic Park. Now I'm in the Mummy. And that's an experience in itself, but there's trade-offs to that. It's
It's a
more scalable
convenient
for them.
way of making it like easier to design
Yeah.
this thing. It's like it's all fake. Yay! Are you immersed yet?
But still, you start seeing like them tacking on things. Like for instance, I talked about Transformers, and then when you go in or out, you could potentially have a character experience with one of the three, Megatron, Bumblebee, or Optimus Prime, right? And he might be stationed outside. And you may see that same thing with Raptor in in the Jurassic World part. And that's pretty much about it. Like you may see a minion in the minion section. I don't remember if you see a Simpsons character in the Simpsons area, but you're and then like random like celebrities from the movies because I get it, Universal. But like um it feels way more like Disney has it more tighter in terms of this is the fantasy that we want. You're gonna smell like that sense. You're gonna see that like we're gonna overload you visually with those sense like with that information, and everything's gonna scream one single like topic. So if it's space or Tomorrowland, it's space. If you're going to Adventureland, it's like that like jungle, like Indiana Jones kind of thing. And if you're in Fantasyland, that's where we push all the princess content. And that's you live and breathe that. And it's easier to parse that information, to consume it, to experience it, than if it's just like random sets like the universal approach.
Yeah, in Universal, it'll be things like you might be in one land, you see like stuff sticking out of the other lands in the background. Whereas at
Okay.
Disney, they'll actually make it so that like, no, you can't see anything
Yeah.
but that. They'll paint the backsides of other ones so that it matches the land that you're in,
Yeah.
so that there's never any loss of immersion in there. Reminds me,
Yeah.
it remembers me the thing of like Ronald McDonald. Whenever someone's dressed as Ronald McDonald the clown, they are Ronald McDonald. They are never to say anything. Like if they get pulled over in their car, they are supposed to tell the cops that they are Ronald McDonald, and McDonald's will pay their bail and cover them, but they should never break character. And it's the same philosophy that Disney has. Like, if you talk
Yeah.
to a character actor,
Mhm.
like, oh, are you Cinderella? It's like, no, I'm friends with Cinderella. They'll say that.
Yeah.
Things like
Yeah.
that.
The
Yeah.
other component that is also really good in terms of like we've talked about physical park experience, right, with Disneyland, but another thing that Disney as a brand that has really well integrated, at least in Walt Disney World, is the Magic Band experience and the idea of
Yeah.
like I want to experience in a frictionless way booking my Disney reservations, getting to the
Mhm.
park and experiencing the park, right? Like
Mhm.
from the moment that you go into the airport, you can actually like check in your bags and you don't see them until you're on your hotel room, as long as you
Yep.
stay in the hotels from Disney, right?
Yeah.
You have a magic band that's mailed to you ahead of time where you have all of your information, dietary allergies, credit card information, your fast pass,
Okay.
like everything, right? You don't actually technically have to carry a wallet if you don't need to. And that's, I
Yeah.
guess, great for the children in that sense. But um you know you get to Orlando, and then now I can ride one of the shuttles that's provided for me to go to specifically the hotel that am staying for the night.
Mhm.
Now my bags are in my room. That's awesome. I don't have to deal
Mhm.
with that. Yeah, guess what? All I had to do is just use the wristband and I opened my door. I don't need to even check in
Mhm.
because I did that online.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
that, the
Yeah.
whole part of like your vacation experience is really,
Mhm.
really good. And I don't know if that exists in if Universal has an equivalent, and I don't think it
Yeah.
does because
Yeah.
again, like
It's
it's a
not that.
different company, a different
Yeah.
world there. But like that
They're.
that experience is really,
Yeah.
really. I mean, there's definitely areas for improvement, but it's really strong. And being able to then say, I can now plan ahead of time what rides I want to go to, and then like request fast
Mhm.
passes, link accounts, like Larry and I can link our accounts, and then all of a sudden I'm managing his like and my time so that we're together doing this. And like I can request like the menu ahead of time. I can say, hey, I actually have food allergies, so I want a different menu. And then they get
Yeah.
really good about like making sure that that
Very
experience
particular.
is good. Yeah, and
Yep.
so there's a lot there that is not like theme park design, but more like service experience, and it's really, really good. And
Mhm.
so again, there's like
My
theme park experience, like ugh.
yeah. My favorite aspect of the Magic Band, it's pretty straightforward, it's pretty simple, but I don't know, it just feels so good. It's I have my Magic Band, I'm at the park, I'm walking through and I go, "Oh, I want to buy this thing." I just walk up and I say, "I want to buy this." And they go, "Okay, Magic Band, I've paid for it." And they say it'll be in your hotel room. If you stay at the hotel, it'll be at your hotel room. They will deliver it for you. I don't have to carry shit. I can just literally walk up and buy 6 different items and walk away, and they will deliver it to my room. That is, it's one of those things that you just don't realize how awesome that is until you want that. Like if I had to walk out with 6 things, I would be like, all right, well, I'm just gonna buy one. Or I'm gonna go back to my hotel room to then just come back, and that dissuades me from
And it's
wanting to
solving
do that.
it's solving problems too. Like Universal right now, at least for Orlando, I'm sorry, not Orlando, Hollywood, you have to go to a locker room and put your stuff there in order to ride so that your stuff doesn't fall out, right? Disney may not have that space for locker rooms. Disney also may not have big enough space on the actual like vehicles that you're riding for you to stuff your shopping stuff. So it's beneficial for them to say, actually, we want you to buy anything you want, and we'll create a whole service here that delivers it. You don't have to worry about it, so that you keep buying stuff from us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a huge business goal that they have, that you know Universal did it in a different way, and it may or may not promote more purchasing. So
Yeah. To tie it back, we took a lot from that whenever we were designing things like worlds for Riot, to make sure that the experience was immersive and really pulled you into the entire thing, so that you weren't like, oh, I'm in line, but do I want to like leave my spot in order to go buy some stuff? Just make it so that it was all easy. You could just quickly do it with your phone, do things like that. And I remember when we were at the one in the worlds in Beijing, like having the AR come swooping in, the big dragon comes swooping in, and you're watching it on the screen first, and you see a dragon come swooping in behind you, and you just instinctively
Yeah.
look behind you, like, oh, what's
Yeah.
that? And like repeatedly throughout the entire thing, even if you know it's AR,
Yeah.
boom, it pulls you in there.
Yeah.
It's so immersive.
There's going to be, in the future, there's going to be biotic implants you can get in your eyes. And it's going to incorporate AR experiences like that, to where you don't even have to look at the screen to see it. It's just in your world. We're in 50
One of the things
years,
that I
when
always
we come
recommended-
back to talk about no more gas pumps and
stations.
ATMs, we're going to talk about that too, because we don't even have to have webcams or anything. We're just all going to have the biotic eyes that do everything for us. And there's going to be no
There's
downside
a
whatsoever,
book.
and nothing bad can happen.
There's a book that I recommend to a ton of other experienced designers, just like because it's such a great envisioning of the future. Is this book called Daemon, Daemon, and the whole premise of it is like this other world going on there, where you have like this other world of AI based things, where there's an entire virtual world that's layered over the entire world, and people can interact with that, use their own system of credibility and credits and everything like that. That you could just walk around the world and not even see what people are doing, because it's so integrated into all of it. And it's such a good book. And the most fascinating bit about it, the premise of it, is that when the book was written, I think in 2007, it only used technology that existed at the time. It just uses it in entirely new ways, which is wonderful. Oh, Mochi.
she looks so grumpy.
She's been staring. So every now and again, you'll see me like look down. That's because she was
All right,
trying to get
Mochi.
my
All right,
attention.
I get it, Mochi.
She's-
You need your people back. Okay, let's get into closing thoughts.
Like, I haven't been fed. This is a problem.
Yeah.
Real quick, we'll keep it short. 1 minute answers. What is your biggest pet peeve in the world of UX?
UX equals UI.
UX equals UI.
Pet
Yeah, right
peeve.
now-
It doesn't.
Right now, because there's a lot of designers, UX designers that put UI designers in their title, or UI designers that put UX designer in their title. There's a lot of confusion and misconceptions of what like the role, I think, entails. And so because you're seeing a lot UX UI, while there is a relation, like, yeah, if there is a tangible thing that you are interacting with, chances are you have to do some UI design. But UX transcends UI. It's literally like it's applied in so many other ways, as explained earlier. And so it gets really frustrating when you're, at least from a very production heavy standpoint, when you're in the very beginning of a product discovery phase, and they're like, all right, cool, but what can you wireframe? And it's like, I have to do research. I have to understand like competitive analysis. I have to understand like, what the audience is, where the needs are, like, what hypothesis we're trying to prove and validate. There's like a lot there that's like very sciencey and an analysis, and not drawing anything. And actually, what's another misconception there is, because they're focused on the artifact that you're providing, which is a wireframe, and it's very visual. They think that that's like the product that you're pushing out, like, but really, there's a lot of thinking that happens that gets to that point of me pushing a wireframe out to you, and then for you to then implement and code. And so, the more work you do understanding ahead, like this whole like nebulous problem, the easier it is for you to use all that information and come up with a tangible, like, visual interface solution if that's your job, right? Or if it's a very experiential thing that requires more like, you know, no UI, like that's the thing too, right? Like, but um there's like two components of that pet peeve. It's like UX equals UI is like something that I get really frustrated about because there's a lot of misconceptions that gets carried. And then that idea that like user experiences only really do like um wireframes and like visual tangible things. There's a ton of work that happens right before that wireframing and prototyping phase of our work that's actually the strength of and the bulk of our work actually.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, what about you?
One of the big one of the big running jokes that we always had in there is like, if you ever see a resume or a job description that says UX/UI, that means they don't understand it. They're just like, oh yeah, this is the buzzword, right? We'll just slap that on there. And it generally means they don't really have an understanding of what's involved in it. And they're just like, oh yeah, we'll just make some wireframes, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I would say my biggest pet peeve is more the when something when it's not done properly, when there's not the research up front, at least there's always a way to make it happen with any time constraint, with any budget constraint to make that happen on there. And with companies that don't really understand it, they might say, like, all right, cool, we'll design all this stuff. Now we'll just slap some UX on there at the end. And at that point, there's nothing you can do. It's already baked, it's built. It needs to be something that's in the beginning. Like, are you even solving the right problem here? It's in the very beginning of the entire process and should be woven throughout the entire thing, where it's a skill set that regardless of what someone's doing on that PM encoding, anything like that, they have some understanding of it. So they at least know which questions to ask to get the right answers to make things better.
Yeah, it sort of goes back to what Vivi was saying about like the bad door designs, where you have like kind of this very beautiful door and it's very intentionally made to be like excellent looking, and then the opening mechanism is like you have to like spin a whale's tail 3 times. You're like, this is just really not great, but it looks good, but it's not great. That's like
You
going.
don't know how to use the 3 shells? Come on.
Yeah,
Yeah, the 3 shells. Yeah,
it's like the Skyrim puzzle where you have to turn the 3 blocks to face a certain shape. It's like that's what happens, at least from my perspective. That's probably what happens when you try to slap UX in at the very end of the project, where you're like, how can we make this actually functional?
Oh,
There's
instead
very
of
little.
3 spins, it's 2 spins.
that saves 1 whole spin
Oh man.
per thing. Think of the
That was
time.
another
Can
thing
you
that
UX
happened
this?
recently. In the UX groups, there was, I forgot, it was some Philips smart bulb, and in order to like access the special thing, it had this just ridiculously archaic like
I know
flip
what you're
on
talking
and off,
about.
like 2 seconds on, 2 seconds off, 5 seconds on, and like it's because there's no interface for it, like such a horrible experience. Where there's so many better solutions they could have done.
The video for that, for clarity, what Chris is talking about, there's a video on how to factory reset your Philips Smart Hue bulb or something like that, where it's like, and the lady does such a great job at the voiceover. She's like, to reset your bulb, please turn off for 5 seconds, on for 3 seconds, off for 5 seconds, and this goes on for like a good minute and a half. It's just like on for 3 seconds. I'm like, what? How long?
It seems like a joke, like a parody of just like a
It
dystopian
does.
world, but no, it's real.
Somebody
Wow.
had to sit down.
Yeah.
Somebody wrote that entire script for that video, and then the person had to sit down in the booth, in the voiceover booth, and be like, "Oh my god!" And then the editor has to sit down and like, oh. Everyone knows that this
point,
is a terrible thing.
At this point, I'm like, I'm just gonna throw it away. Like I'll just buy a new one. It's not worth it.
All right. Let's wrap up. We've been here for about 2 hours. Vivi and Chris, thank you so much for coming on to the show. If you have anything you want to plug, now's the time. I know both of you are both kind of working on your own projects, but if you wanted to say, come check this out, now's the time.
Go first.
I don't really have anything to plug right now on there. I think probably the most recent thing would be, I have a good friend who just recently published a book that I'm heavily featured in. I talked a lot about stuff. It's called What's Your Problem? To solve your toughest problems, change the problems you solve. And it's I'm very happy with that name. I like it, but it's all
That's
about
a great name.
it's all about how to. I mean, it's about innovation. He's published several books through like Harvard Business Review on like how to innovate, do things like that. And this one is specifically focused on reframing, so that you're actually thinking about whether you're solving the right problem or not. And I have a lot of my stories about like Stephen Hawking and other projects and stuff in there. It's
You pick that up on
good book.
Amazon?
Yep.
Awesome. So it's called What's Your
I'm
Problem?
literally
It's on
about to pick it
Amazon.
up.
Pick it up.
Yeah, we're saying.
What about you, Vivi?
I don't really have anything to say other
Go
than
play
like
Dauntless.
yeah. Well, there's that. If you like to kill monsters, we have some really cool ones called Behemoth and Dauntless. Am I doing this right? I don't know. No, yeah, like complete Dauntless. We're gonna have like I'm working on a new feature. I'm really excited to test it out with players and see like how we can potentially create more interesting social experiences for players, or slayers as we call them. And yeah, I mean I'm pretty accessible, like reachable on Twitter. So it's the same. Yeah, it's VOCASIOD.
Down there somewhere.
So yeah, down somewhere in the on the channel. But yeah, and then so if you have any questions about UX games or even Dauntless, like please reach out to me.
How do you say that, by the
I know
way?
I will.
What?
What?
Your
Dauntless?
Twitter handle. No. Do you have a pronunciation for it?
Vocasiad?
Ocasiad.
I mean, Ocasio is my last name, and the V is for Vivianette, and the D is because I originally was Ocasio de Jesus, and so that's actually like a Purdue University like name that that username has carried over like as a
I never made
professional
that
name.
connection. I was like,
But
I
then
was sat down looking at it and I'm like, I wonder why she has this name. I never made that connection. I'm
like
sat
this
down.
D randomly there.
Yeah.
But after marrying this troll,
Ugh.
I
I can't believe you did that, by the way.
You what now?
Me
I
neither.
said I can't
and me
believe you
both,
did that,
man.
by the way.
But yeah, I basically dropped the De Jesus part of my name and then got the Colvin part of my name. But because I'm too lazy about writing Vivianette Ocasio Colvin, I just go by Vivianette Ocasio. And the D is just because like I miss that De Jesus part of my identity. But yeah, V Ocasio D is normally how I say it. Just because it's a name.
Yeah, if you're having trouble finding
it-
it, I'll link it down in the podcast description and the YouTube video as well. So it'll be there.
Also, the in-game name for Dauntless is like Phoenix. It's PHX_Nebuluna. NEBULUNA. You will probably provide that as well.
Yeah, I'll put that down there. Yeah, so check out Vivi on Twitter and in Dauntless if you want to say hi. Chris doesn't actually have an updated Twitter. I tried to find one, but I think the only one I could find was some like I don't even know what he was like it was odd because he was an experienced designer, but I think he was like talking about going and visiting places as experiences, and his Twitter hasn't been active in like 10 years or something.
That's very true. Throughout doing ethnographic research all around the world, I've probably lived in about 45 countries now, and I wrote about it quite a bit during that too.
Oh, is that your Twitter?
It was.
Oh,
but
okay.
It has not been touched in many years.
I was like, I couldn't figure out if it was you or not. I'm like, it's the same @ but it oh.
Yeah, he joined TikTok way before it was cooler. I'm teasing.
I was like, wait, Chris did?
Larry's like, how do I join?
Why am I not friends with you yet?
Anyway, thanks both of you for coming on, taking your precious, lovely time to talk to me and Larry about user experience, and I hope the listeners got something out of it, because I know I sure did, and I appreciate everyone who spent the time to sit down and talk to us about it. So if you want to watch the podcast on YouTube, youtube.com/Nighthawk20000. We try to do an episode every Wednesday, so you should be able to see a video up there every week or so, usually. And if you can't catch it live and you can't catch it on YouTube, check us out on iTunes, Google Music, or sorry, soon to be Google Podcasts, and Spotify. We're all on there. So if you want to listen, it's on there. Leave us a comment, leave us a rating, leave us a follow. Helps a lot with the show. And as always, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.